Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Alberta had the best government in terms of the lockdown. For a very long time, it resisted the mob mentality that the other provincial governments indulged, and briefly, that most U.S. states fell into. I can imagine that must have been hard, given that the public health industrial complex is inherently hierarchical and globalist and is based on a culture of obedience, not dissent. They move in packs. Bad ideas spread quickly. They all just repeat each other. I really don't know why every city and every province even bothers having their own public health officers and a deputy public health officer, literally hundreds of them in Canada, most of them earning mid-six figures. Dina Hinshaw, the public health bureaucrat in Alberta, makes a whopping $370,000 a year. That's exactly double what Premier Jason Kenney earns, by the way. Isn't that weird? But why do we need 100 of these health scolds if all they do is just read from the same talking points written by the United Nations World Health Organization or Anthony Fauci? My point is, for the first year, it must have been hard for Alberta to avoid just following along with Theresa Tam and Fauci, especially with the media being such avid lobbyists for total lockdowns. But Jason Kenney in Alberta held out for quite a while. You could say they were the Florida of Canada, and Jason Kenney was the Ron DeSantis of Canada, until they utterly collapsed and capitulated and just handed the reins of government over to the unelected, unaccountable health bureaucrats that no one ever heard of until last year. Just completely collapsed, exhausted, went from the best to the worst. It's funny because I know a lot of staff in Kenney's office, and when I was out west last year before the capitulation, it was from one of them that I learned the term doctator, as in a dictator doctor. I thought it was funny, and I thought it was great because, like most good jokes, it's true. Well, the doctators had the last laugh, didn't they? Alberta went from the lightest touch to the heaviest. I've seen some awful lockdown policings around the world. I've shown you this horror show before of an Australian mum having a crying child ripped out of her arms, and she is thrown in the back of a police van for the non-crime of carrying a sign dissenting. Horrific child abuse. And you see some ad hoc thuggery, well, pretty much everywhere, actually. I chalk some of it up to unclear laws that aren't really laws. They're just orders that aren't easy to understand by either citizens or the police. They change all the time. The whole situation's stressful. The bizarre world of police enforcing imaginary things that aren't crimes, like 6 feet apart, put on your mask, instead of, real crimes. But what I've just described is usually spontaneous problems in the moment that on sober second thought were often apologized for by police chiefs after a calm review. As in, I think the worst abuses in the lockdowns were from clueless cops enforcing vague rules and maybe getting carried away. They were rogue incidents, even though there were a lot of them. But that does not apply to Alberta. I mean, yeah, no shortage of thugs with badges like this Calgary cop who, bizarrely, wasn't immediately sacked.
Down on the ground. To me. Down on the ground. Why are you guys grabbing? Dude, you guys just need to. Why are you guys grabbing?
Hey, orcs.
Not pulling, okay? Ocean, get on the ground.
Ocean.
Get on the ground. Why are you guys
Get
on the fucking ground right now?
Ocean.
Guys, please. Get on the ground before I taser you. Ocean. Right now. Why are you tasering?
Completely unprofessional, swearing, out of control, emotional, physically weak, abusive, poor judgment, threatening violence on a kid for skating outdoors on a city rink. I mean, atrocious, a disgrace, but it wasn't planned, right? What we've seen from the government of Alberta in the past 6 months of their dictatorship isn't rogue, spontaneous abuse. It's methodical, planned, the result of high-level meetings, approvals. It's official. It's sanctioned. It's what the Alberta government wants. It's who they are. It's the revenge of the nerds. The public health bullies who were ignored for most of a year now have their way. So when Pastor Arthur Pawlowski was arrested after church, it was planned. Police had been tracking him for weeks. They knew where his church was, where his home was, but in the end, they chose to swarm him with a massive SWAT team operation. They pulled him over on the highway for some reason, extracted him from his vehicle, forced him to walk into the middle of the highway, forced him to kneel on his knees, cars whizzing by. What? That was not a spontaneous thing. The Grace Life Church in Edmonton, they never had an outbreak of the disease at all. But police physically raided the church at dawn, expropriated the building, put latrines on the church property as close to the entrance as they could just to defile the place. They put up tarps to hide whatever other indiscretions were happening. And they turned the whole facility into an armed garrison for literally months. That was not spontaneous. That was not rogue officers or inexperienced cops making the wrong call. These are master plans approved at the highest political levels. Arrests, jail, 35 days in prison for Pastor James Coates in Edmonton. That was an accident. But that was not an accident. That was asked for by the government specifically. He didn't just land in jail for 35 days. Government lawyers representing the Alberta government, taking direction from the health department and Dina Hinshaw, asked for him to be jailed for 35 days. Pastor Coates, Pastor Tim Stevens. And then Tim Stevens was arrested a second time. Do you remember this footage? This is from June 14th, more than 2 weeks ago. He's still in prison today.
My daddy.
Bye, guys. Okay? We're gonna move, okay? Not too close, not too close.
Okay, guys, step back, please.
My daddy.
I love you very much, okay? Stay strong, okay? Christ will build his church.
So he's still in prison, and he'll be there for 2 more weeks, actually. He will be in prison a month for an offense that does not itself contemplate any jail time. And more than that, Alberta is boasting that it will finally lift the last of the lockdown rules on Thursday, on Canada Day. But Alberta government lawyers specifically asked that Tim Stevens, that dad and pastor, be jailed until his hearing 2 weeks from now. What? What's the public health rationale for that? Churches, which had special penalties under Alberta lockdown law, by the way, companies like Costco and Walmart were allowed to operate at a certain percentage of their fire code capacity. So like 15% or 20%. But churches, no matter how large they are, the largest cathedral, one of the mega churches, there's some churches that hold 2,000 people, they were only allowed a maximum number of 15 people in the church, no matter how large the facility, 15 people. Oh, unless it was a funeral, in which case it would be 10 people. Unless the funeral was outdoors, in which case it would be 5 people. What? There's no data or science behind that. That's just bigotry. And it was enforced brutally against Christian churches only. For some reason, NHL teams had full exemptions for them and their entire entourage. They were even allowed to go to restaurants that you and I weren't. Hollywood celebrities too. They were welcome to come to Alberta to film huge productions, hundreds of people. But Canadian pastors in church, off to jail. Even though the lockdown will be lifted in Alberta on Thursday, on Canada Day, Pastor Tim Stevens remains in jail, and he will remain in jail for 2 more weeks because shut up. That's why. You want an answer? Shut up is the answer. Really? As Oscar Wilde would say, to jail one Christian pastor may be regarded as a misfortune. To jail 2 looks like carelessness. But 3 pastors jailed now? 2 of them for a month? And no other jurisdiction in the world has jailed a pastor even once in a lockdown. Well, some people might start to think that maybe you've got yourself a bit of a bigotry problem. And indeed, people are asking that very thing. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, a rising Republican voice, he wrote a letter to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom asking them to put Canada on their watch list. So did Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin. I have personally received an invitation to speak to a group of congressmen in Washington about this. Can you believe it? I know that the Canadian political class doesn't care about any of this. Not one Conservative MP has said a word, not one Conservative senator, even though they are beyond reprisal from their party leader, let alone any other party. But the rest of the world thinks we're getting a bit careless with our pastors. Last night, Alberta's health bureaucrat, it's hard to tell the difference, she was milking the last few days of her unchecked power. her dream come true to be a tyrant will be over for her in 2 days. She'll go back to being a nobody, a $370,000 a year nobody. But she was ringing out the last few days. She tweeted this: the pandemic is over. There are a grand total of 39 people in intensive care in the entire province of 4.5 million people. That's fewer than 1 in 100,000. And they, as always, have many comorbidities. They're sick to begin with. Look, this thing is over. The party is over. And yet the province is still under a lockdown today. Why not lift it right now? Why not lift it now? They said they would, by the way, if certain yardsticks were met. They were. Why not lift it a month ago? 3 months ago, actually. I mean, the death toll plummeted really after Christmas. It was over. Why didn't she end it before? She's the boss, and she loves being the boss too much. That's why. Here's what I wrote in reply to her tweet, her last 48 hours of power. I said, your policies have caused far more death than they have saved. You sentenced hundreds of Albertans to death through depression, suicide, and drug overdoses. You destroyed thousands of businesses, ruined thousands of marriages. You are a wicked woman who is going to hell. Now, I admit that last sentence is a bit of a flourish. I'm not sure what it means theologically, but I do know the wreckage she has caused to countless lives, countless families. I know a bit of what Dante thinks hell looks like, but for someone like Dina Hinshaw or Anthony Fauci or Theresa Tam, I imagine that hell would be having to listen to the crying children of Tim Stevens bid their father farewell for eternity, just listening to this.
My daddy.
Bye, guys. Okay? We're gonna move, okay? Not too close, not too close.
Okay, guys, step back, please.
My daddy.
I love you very much, okay? Stay strong, okay? Christ will build his church.
I would think that being forced to listen to that and knowing that you caused that, and knowing the other pain you caused, the families that were not allowed to be together for a funeral, families that were not allowed to have weddings, kids that were not allowed to have graduations, children who were not allowed to go to school. I imagine that hell for a public health bureaucrat is having to face their own carnage and knowing that they did that. But who knows, maybe Dina Hinshaw would get an enjoyment out of that. Maybe that is what she gets her kicks from. After all, she was one who ordered that be done to Tim Stevens. She hasn't disowned it. Why would she find it hellish to listen to that or watch that for eternity? Maybe that's like her highlight reel of career successes. We've had a Jumbotron truck driving around Calgary with footage on it of Pastor Tim Stevens being taken away and his crying children, juxtaposed with the image of Alberta's health minister at that Sky Palace party, violating the same lockdown laws that Tim Stevens was being jailed for. We took the truck with that Jumbotron to the health minister's office. Oh, he hated it. He sent security to tell us to leave. After we deployed that truck and after the U.S. politicians started to write about the pastors in Alberta being jailed, I started getting private messages from old friends who were in the Alberta Premier's office and its wider circle, asking us here at Rebel News to call it off, telling us to pipe down now. I'm not going to name them because their notes were private and they're friends, but the thing is, it's not over now. It's not over, is it? A dad is in jail and he will be for 2 more weeks. I didn't do that. No one else in the world did that. Why would I stop criticizing that? If Justin Trudeau did that, would I not be criticizing him too? Of course I would. And then I got this tweet from Ben Harper, Stephen Harper's son. He's grown up now. He works for Jason Kenney now in the Premier's office. I haven't seen Ben in a long time, since he was a student. I was surprised that he went to work for Jason Kenney as a political staffer. I had thought he was on a business path after school, do something more productive in life. But I'm afraid young Ben has become a partisan political pro. And I suppose the shame on Chandro Jumbotron plus the U.S. Republican scoldings, plus the incredible plunging opinion polls are probably getting to them. And so Ben felt compelled to respond to my mean tweet. Which is worse, jailing a pastor and father or my mean tweet about it? I guess they're both pretty bad, eh? Anyways, here's what Ben Harper said to me.
In China, Christians who worship outside government-approved boundaries are driven underground, and their leaders are arrested and detained. While Uyghur Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, and Falun Gong practitioners are subject to repression and intimidation. Under our government, Canada has spoken out consistently and emphatically, without fear or favor. Canada defends human rights around the world. And we have not only spoken out, we have also taken action. As Canadians, as citizens of a free country, we have a solemn duty. As Sir Wilfrid Laurier once said, and I quote, we should always remember this, Le Canada est libre et la liberté c'est sa nationalité. Canada is free and freedom is its nationality.
Oh, sorry. That's not what Ben Harper said to me. That's what Stephen Harper said about religious freedom when he was Prime Minister. Sorry. Here's what Ben Harper tweeted to me. Sorry, my mistake. That's what Jason Kenney tweeted about churches being bullied by police. Here, let me find the Ben Harper one. Okay, here it is. Just like the perpetual lockdown crowd, no data to back up ridiculous, unhinged claims. Show some class. Albertans were well served by Dina Hinshaw's data-driven approach. Glad clickbait-driven extremists on both sides were ignored. Well, yeah, no, Ben. There is a lot of data about how lockdowns kill. They kill through suicides. They kill through drug addiction and overdoses. They kill through mortality and morbidity of poverty. As in, once you're poor, everything gets worse. Regular health is worse. Cancer surgeries are canceled. The stabilities of marriages fall apart under lockdown. Depression. This is not my opinion. As I showed on the program the other day, Statistics Canada made it clear for the first few months of the pandemic, according to Statistics Canada, excess deaths, as they called it, were amongst senior citizens dying from COVID. It's true for the first part of the year, but then the excess deaths were the young people dying from the lockdowns. That's your data, Ben. But I'm open to data, open to science. I'd like to know what science or medicine or data says NHL teams can meet with their whole entourage, but not churches. That Walmarts and Costco's have a percentage of their capacity, say 30% of their fire code, but the churches can only have an absolute number of 15 people, no matter how large they are, 10 people for a funeral and 5 if it's outdoors. Where's the math for that, Ben? Where's the data for that, Ben? The government was asked. St. Dina Hinshaw was asked. In the course of their prosecution of that Edmonton pastor James Coates, they were asked to justify their data. And a year after the lockdowns, Hinshaw's official position to the judge was that she needed more time to get the data together to show why Coates had to be jailed. So yeah, we're all waiting to learn what that data is, Ben. What's the data behind jailing Tim Stephens even now after the lockdown is being lifted, Ben? But that's not what really bugs me. I sort of like the fact that Ben Harper is showing some political loyalty to his boss, Jason Kenney. Loyalty is a good thing generally. I wish he'd attack the left as vigorously as he attacks the right and calls us extreme. But it's tough to say where being a lockdownist puts you on a political spectrum anymore, doesn't it? Is that right wing? Is that left wing? But what bugged me was this line, show some class. Show some class. And he called me an extremist. Really, Ben? Am I not classy enough? I'm too low class for you, Ben. I'm not high class. I'm not fancy. I'm not part of the establishment. I think you're right. I'm not part of the NHL class that's exempt. I'm not a millionaire hockey player, a billionaire hockey owner. I'm not part of the Hollywood movies that for some reason had a data-driven exemption from Dina Hinshaw, the politicians, the lobbyists, the bureaucrats who have these Sky Palace parties with $50 bottles of booze. It is true. I'm not classy enough for that, Ben. It is true. I'm what the Brits would call middle class. I'm not working class. I'm not high class. My dad was a doctor. I've got a law degree. But I went to a public high school and a normal university. I work for a living. I'm not high class, that's for sure. I use the wrong fork most of the time, but you know, I'm old enough, Ben, and I come from Calgary, so I actually know your parents, Ben. I knew them each before they were married to each other. Did you know that? Lorene Teskey and Stephen Harper, and I know them a bit. And they're not high class either. Your mom, Lorene, is pretty plain spoken. She likes being outdoors, motorbikes, guns. I remember she had a party for a book launch for me at 24 Sussex Drive. It was a pizza party. Seriously, 24 Sussex Drive, a pizza party, not catered hors d'oeuvres. Stephen Harper, is he high class, Ben? He fired a cabinet minister who ordered a $16 orange juice from a hotel minibar. Your mom and dad were not elitists. They were the opposite. They were attacked mercilessly as being low-class hillbillies, cowboys, unsophisticated, grubby populists. They were called extremists too. It's just weird hearing those insults from their son, the same insults that were used against them for years. Extremists, low-class. But it's funny, when I was a kid, I was 21, when I knew Lorene and Stephen separately, when the old Mulrooney Tories and then the Kim Campbell Tories were in their final death throes, 1993, that's how old I am. And they still had power in those final months. They still had donors, and back then corporations could make huge donations. So the federal PC party was actually very rich and powerful, or so it seemed right before they lost every seat except two. But it was all just the Palace Guard, the loyalists who had nothing to offer in terms of policy or ideas, but they had connections and money for their remaining time. That's how this all feels to me. Don't criticize the United Conservative Party. That's low class and extremist. Yeah, I guess it is. I wasn't invited up to the Sky Palace to have a shot of $50 booze and look down on the ants below scurrying around and order up the police chief to round up some pastors to deter the others. It's true, Ben, I'm low class, certainly lower than you think you are, but I know where you come from, Ben, even if you've forgotten. I looked at who liked and retweeted young Ben. I was curious and I was struck by something. How much that list was dominated by lobbyists. I'm serious. There were no grassroots conservatives, at least not many. No party workers, the type of folks who door knock 1,000 doors, who spend 100 hours putting up lawn signs. People who work out of love and belief in policy, not money, not lobbyists. Not a lot of grassroots conservatives, but an awful lot of those hangers-on. The ones who will milk the system to the last moment. The folks who were there from Mulrooney and Kim Campbell right to the end in 1993. Lobbyists, 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 lobbyists. People who know that Jason Kenney and his lockdownists aren't conservative anymore. People who know getting reelected will be a challenge, if it's even possible. People who know they've lost their ideological way, but these lobbyists can still make a buck off their connections for at least another year or two. And so they want to signal to Ben, who works for Kenney, that they're on his side here. And they're not low class either. They're high class like you, Ben. So can he please answer their emails and return their phone calls about some scheme they're trying to sell, or some procurement contract they're trying to land, or some appointment they're trying to finagle? I don't know. I actually like Ben Harper, even if you can't tell. Or at least I like the young student he was when I last spoke with him years ago. But his dad stood for something and stood against something. Stephen Harper was a real conservative, and he hated the political media industrial complex, the permanent bureaucracy. I don't think he would be white knighting for public health officials who violate liberty with a smile. Who knows? Maybe Stephen Harper has become a swamp creature in his retirement too. I don't think so, but maybe. I just have a tough time believing that the great conservative prime minister who set up an office for religious freedom would also send police to arrest pastors again and again and again and jail them for months and pass rules that specifically punish churches. I don't believe it. Then again, I wouldn't have believed it that Jason Kenney would either. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.